The following is a Cruizers Motorsports exclusive.
Auto theft. It's a major pain in the ass for everybody involved. The car owner, insurance companies, towing and recovery, law enforcement, even for the car thief if they get caught, as it's a felony and carries 18 to 72 months in prison depending on the state. I possess the dated skills required to do this with old cars, not for nefarious reasons, but due to the fact I used to lose my car keys more times than Chrysler's needed pulled out of bankruptcy. It's a useful skill, as I've owned around 250 cars or so in the last 30 years.
Here is our list.
That's a big list.
So before the experts light up the comment section with their greasy little fingers later on in the video, let me be very clear. I do not condone auto theft, and this is not a how-to video. I'm well aware that certain models require slightly different procedures, extra tools, and know-how. You have to remember, this is the history of the term hot wiring, and I'm not going to go into super details and contributing to any of you delinquents out there. Don't steal cars, don't do drugs, and stay in school, or however that went. Believe me when I say I'm keeping this video vague for a reason. Before we get to how the term hot wiring came to be and how it's evolved over the years, we have to look at the why. Now, there's a myriad of reasons why a would-be thief would steal a car, but it mainly comes down to two reasons: joyriding and stripping for parts. Joyriding is pretty straightforward. Car thieves that do this are usually on the amateur end of the spectrum. They want the rush of tearing up a car they wouldn't normally be able to afford with zero consequences. You know, unless they get caught. Stripping for parts is a bit more complicated. You see, most late model cars are worth more in parts than they are whole. This is because the original manufacturer of those parts are the only one pushing those parts out, so the prices are high. Prices are also high because most people drive something late model. Supply and demand. For those uninitiated in vehicles, you'd probably believe that the top 10 stolen cars were high-end or luxury vehicles like your Lamborghinis or Bentleys. Nope! The top 10 stolen cars, year after year, is a who's who of the basic bitch cars of the automotive industry. Look at this list from 2024. Do you see a single Porsche or Lexus on this list? Because this list is amongst the best-selling cars, and that means there's just more of them on the road, which also means that they have more accidents and breakdowns than other cars. Does this mean high-end cars don't get stolen? Well, of course they do. Does this mean a fender from a Nissan Altima is worth more than a fender off of a Ferrari 458? No. But realistically, no one is driving their Ferrari to their job at Walmart every day either. I'm saying all this for a reason. The why is related to the history of the term hot wiring. I'll come back to that. Now, I'll get to the point of today's video, how to steal a car. The history of the term hot wiring. The term hot wiring can trace its roots back to pre-1970s cars. Its meaning back then was quite literal. For all my non-mechanic friends, a hot wire in a car is a wire that has power going to it whether the car is on or off. So, you know when you hit the horn button in your car and it works, no matter whether the key's in it or not? That's because there is a wire running to it that constantly has power, as long as your car battery is good. When you depress the horn, the switch completes the circuit, and then power travels from the switch down to the horn and activates it. In old cars, that same wire with constant power to it, or a hot wire, also ran to the ignition switch. Now, pre-1970s, most cars' ignition switches were located in the lower dash, and under the dash was just simply exposed. This ignition switch serves the same purpose as the aforementioned horn button, meaning it simply completes the circuit to the starter and the primary ignition once you turn the key. If you simply connect the constant power wire or hot wire over to the other side of the ignition switch, you can complete the circuit yourself, bypassing the ignition switch and quote-unquote hot wiring the car. However, as literal as the term was, it was about to change. In the late 1960s, the hot wiring method with ignitions in the lower dash had been around for around 30 years. Manufacturers really didn't care to fix this because if your car was stolen and not recovered, it just meant you had to buy another one. They didn't care, that was, until auto theft became a major problem in metropolitan areas. Remember what I said before about the manufacturers being the only ones who could provide parts for late model cars? Well, the stolen and stripped car market was now undercutting the factory prices at this point, not allowing the big auto manufacturers to turn as much of a profit. So the first thing done to really prevent car theft in the early 70s, most car manufacturers moved the ignition switch from the lower dash with its exposed wires underneath to inside the steering column. This encased all the wires, in an attempt to keep them away from would-be thieves. While there was a way at the very base of the column that you could still technically hotwire the car, it certainly took more time than just creating a jump wire from one side of the ignition switch to the other, which you did in pre-1970s cars. Time is the one thing a car thief is short on. Obviously, the quieter and faster they can steal a car, the further away they can get before it's reported stolen. The Gone in 60 Seconds movies were aptly named this, as it's a car thief's #1 rule. If they cannot steal a car in under 60 seconds, then they just simply walk away. Many car owners at this point had self-installed kill switches that were often hidden to slow down or stop the theft altogether. So, thieves quickly adapted a new method. Instead of a pair of wire cutters to bypass the old in-dash ignition switches, now they carried a brick hammer. They would use the spike on the end to strike the area of the steering column to break it open and expose the ignition switch. An experienced thief could do this in 3 or 4 blows. Once exposed, all a thief had to do was push the rod that the ignition switch would normally turn to start the car. With the ignition switch relocated to the steering column and the fact that there weren't any wires involved anymore, the terminology changed in the automotive world from hot wiring to peeling the column. However, since a stolen car's slang on the street is a hot car, the act of stealing one was still called hot wiring, now used as a slang term instead of the literal procedures of old. I find it funny that car manufacturers left the ignition switch in the lower dash and didn't do much at all to address auto theft until they put the ignition in the steering column. Then, they made the steering column out of paper mache for thieves until about the early to mid-90s, when steering columns went from this to this. Yeah, steering columns got really fat. Why? Because manufacturers began putting steel cages around the ignition switches. The literal term of hot wiring would fade away in the mid-90s. It was at this time that auto manufacturers switched from OBD1 to OBD2, OBD meaning onboard diagnostics, making the ignition switch much more electronic than manual. Auto mechanics could still technically hotwire a car by bypassing certain things under the hood, but this was a lengthy process and complete and utterly useless to car thieves wanting to make a quick getaway. In the early 2000s, manufacturers would again start placing the ignition switches back in the dash, though higher up, as not to have easy access from underneath the dash, and with a similar steel cage around it to deter car thieves even more because they were losing so much money to the stolen car part market. With the advancements of computerized ignitions and other anti-theft electronics, today's car thieves have adapted, though at a higher financial cost. Gone are the days of just needing a pair of wire snips or a brick hammer. Modern thieves use an expensive key fob signal cloner for the fastest results nowadays. Since the introduction of electronic key fobs, the term hot wiring has really fallen by the wayside, even as a slang term, relegating it to a Hollywood movie trope. Even today, Hollywood would lead you to believe that you can still just touch 2 wires underneath the dash and start a car under 60 seconds, even though it hasn't been like that for around 2 decades. The most accurate Hollywood would ever get to car theft was the Gone in 60 Seconds movies. Yes, I said movies as in plural, both the 2000 version and the original 1974 version.
The asshole can pull a gun on somebody. You don't know the first thing about stealing a car. What? You need a role model.
Even though these movies are quite outdated now. I hope you enjoyed this little romp through the history of hot wiring. If you like rad era content, consider subscribing, as there's a ton of it here on the Cruizers Motorsports channel. And if you care to support the channel even further, hey everybody, I just wanted to take a moment to tell you that the first batch of Cruisers t-shirts are now available. Joining the roster of Cruiser stickers available for purchase on eBay, or by messaging me through the Cruisers Discord. Links to the stickers and the brand new Cruiser shirts will be in the description down below should you want to support the channel. I thank you for that support, my friends, and remember, those friends, they're the family you get to choose. I'll see you next week, fellow Cruisers.